I'm Robert Shaw, as you already know, and the topic today that we're here to talk about is called Western education, but that's about as silly as saying Chinese education, isn't it? Because it's an enormous, vast topic. And so what I can do is I can talk about things from my point of view, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I look at education and teaching, particularly university teaching. And we'll talk a little bit about the theory that impresses me, the Western theory that impresses me, and then we'll talk a bit about the practice, the things that I actually do, and I'm talking about the things that I do here in China. And I must tell you, I've only been here for one semester, so if I say something about China, it's pretty much going to be wrong, but I can just tell you what I think, and you will be able to take that in the spirit that it's given, and we can have a discussion. I don't mind if you interrupt as we do this, so if you've got something to say, just sort of wave, and that would be really good. And I noticed that we're the only males here.
Really?
Yes, I know, apart from the camera operator. And it's always the case that all the women go to teacher events, to events on teaching. Always the women. I don't know why that is, but the women seem to outnumber the men. So here we are. We're in a special category. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself, just to get underway. I came... Hello, that's okay. Come on in, grab a seat. I come from New Zealand, right? Down there, a little place in New Zealand. And just about 10 years ago, they started to do some interesting research tracking the DNA of people, DNA profiling, to find out where different peoples of the world came from. And do you know the indigenous people of New Zealand? Do you know the people, the native people of New Zealand? Maori people, right, Maori people. And a discovery was made with DNA that relates to Maori people. About 4,000 years ago, the people in southern China and around here migrated across to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. About 4,000 years ago. Came from southern China across here. Now, in those days, the sea was lower. There was less seawater, so there was more land. So in actual fact, you could not quite walk, but it was, you know, a lot more land, so that you could actually get across there. So 4,000 years ago, a migration of people from southern China, as much as anywhere over there, across there. And 1,000 years ago, those same people started to migrate south. And that was when the Maori people started in New Zealand. So I'm telling my Maori friends, you're actually Chinese. You don't know it, but you're Chinese. And they're, oh. So, but that's an interesting link that we've got between New Zealand and China. And there's a lot of work.
They don't look like Chinese.
Well, I don't know about that. Because since I've been here, and I wander around on the streets and so forth and look lost, I see people and I think, oh, that's so-and-so. And so I think some of them do look a lot like Chinese. Yeah, so anyway, I'm going back and I'm going to tell them all that. I'm going to tell them that they're Chinese and they should appreciate the fact. We've got a small farm back in New Zealand. I sort of spent some time on that.
Thank you.
That's named Fudge. That's a girl, and her name is Fudge.
How do you spell it?
Fudge, F-U-D-G-E. Fudge. Fudge is a sweet. It's a lolly that kids would have. Fudge. It's a sugary stuff. A lot of sugar in fudge.
F-U-D-G-E.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you.
And that's Fudge, and they're from the camelid family. They come from South America. We farm them, but there's only a small number. We've only got about 15 of them, so it's just tiny wee farm. Not a big farm, not like sheep.
Okay.
There were 4 born this year. So, that takes us to there. So, what I thought we'd do today is that I'll say a bit about my approach to teaching, and what I mean by that really is my approach to teaching, the theoretical side of it, right? The ideas that I have behind what I do. I'll talk to you about that because I used to work in teacher education once. I'm in business education now, and I've been in business education for the best part of 20 years. But before that, I was in teacher education. So mainly in Australia, I was lecturing to teachers and would-be teachers, teacher trainees in Australia. So I've got a background in teaching as well as in business. And I do a bit of both where I can. So I was really pleased to get the invitation to come and talk to you because nothing I like more than talking about teaching. So there we are. So that's that one, my approach. Secondly, I'll talk about Western university education and the sorts of changes that have taken place in the last 20 years, and particularly to try and give a view, my view, on what that means for China and the implications of that for China. I can only touch on that a little bit. Then we'll talk about the nitty-gritty stuff that all teachers like to talk about, how I teach. And I'll just take you through a list of things how I teach here, and tell you why I'm doing what I'm doing, and you can make what you will of it. And then lastly, we'll have a little session on where to go from here, because this isn't really about my teaching, this is actually about your teaching. And so we'll have a little session on what you might be thinking in terms of the development of your own teaching. And I will give you some ideas on where you might look if you wanted to pursue that topic. So that's the plan. Looks as if we'll be here till about midnight. Okay. There are many ways that you can divide up what we do in teaching, but perhaps one of the common one is to make the distinction between the curriculum, what it is that you teach, right? What your goals are, what you're trying to do. If you're trying to teach some knowledge, what is that knowledge you're trying to teach? It might be business or it might be economics or something. And then there's the evaluation, the strategies that you use for your assessment of the students and how that actually works. And then there's the question of pedagogy, how you teach, the actual methods that you use. Now I put them there and they look as if they're quite clean and tidy things, but the real truth of the matter is that they're mixed together in such a way as to make it impossible really to separate one from the other. For example, Paulo Freire, who was a very famous Brazilian educator, he wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Pedagogy, right? How you teach the oppressed. But it was really about curriculum. What he said, what Paulo Freire said was that if you want to inspire your students and you want to get them interested in learning things that are important to them, then teach them politics. Teach them politics. Teach them about the things that affect their lives on a day-by-day basis and get them involved in that. And don't just teach them all the stuff that's in textbooks, which he called banking knowledge, like you put the knowledge in your head, like you put money in the bank and it just sits there and it doesn't do anything. Banking knowledge. So he called his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, one of his books, but it was really, I'd say, about curriculum. Right? He said, well, you should teach this sort of thing. So I'm going to use today that framework, and we'll talk a little bit about curriculum, pedagogy and evaluation. And I can only just introduce those things in a very quick way. From the point of view of the student, life looks like that. The most important thing for the students, from the ones I talk to, and I've talked to quite a few now because I like to eat in the student canteens and talk to them, poor students. I think they're having their dinner and then I bowl up and start asking them questions. The examination looms large. That's what they focus on. That's the big deal. The textbook also looms pretty large because that's strongly linked to the examination. So there's that thing. And then the teacher is a lesser thing, and they'll never say a bad word against any teacher in China, anywhere, at any time, so far as I can see. Had a lot of conversations about teachers, and they all say nothing but nice things about their teachers. So Okay, so that's the student perspective. That's the way that the students seem to be seeing things from what I can see here in China. So curriculum, this question of what you teach. And the first point I want to make is that there's a lot of confused thinking about what it is that we are teaching and what we should be teaching and what the possibilities are for our teaching. What's the range of things that you actually could teach? And these things get tied up in what you mean by knowledge, and what you mean by understanding, and what you mean by skills. Those distinctions are quite important distinctions. Unless you can say what you're going to mean by knowledge and how you think knowledge is different from understanding, you haven't really started as a teacher yet, because you've got to be clear about what it is that you're actually trying to do in your presentations in your classroom. And if you're not clear on those sorts of words, then I wonder about what your thinking is. And so that's always the starting point. And when I was a young student in education courses, we used to have to write essays on the difference between knowledge and understanding and that sort of thing. Because these are concepts, and they're concepts. They're not things that we just are looking for a hard, fast definition. You get the definition and the whole thing's done. It's not like that at all. These are concepts. And what you mean by a concept is going to depend on the context in which you're using it. It's going to depend on a whole range of related things. And so those things have to be brought out if you're going to make sense of words like knowledge and understanding. But the one that's really interesting and important is this whole business of teaching skills. Teaching skills, and so it raises this question of what is a skill, and can you actually teach a skill? And we're concerned with a particular kind of skill. Right? We know what skills are, don't we? Skills like, I'll give you an example. If you find a piece of chalk, I'll show you a skill. No chalk, I'll use this thing. Right, here's a skill. That's all right. Skill. Can anybody juggle?
You should juggle.
Now, all that needs to... you can do it, you can.
Yes, two.
Now, if I had 2 or 3 of them, and it would be absolute chaos, wouldn't it? Yeah, it would be chaos. I couldn't do it with 2. So that's a skill, and that's the skill of juggling, isn't it? All right. Now, if you were going to teach the skill of juggling, how do you go about teaching the skill of juggling? Well, I know, you say, juggling is important in China. Very important, they say. This is what they said about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship, very important in China. Right? Because we look at the West and we say, the West says that their economies are being driven by innovation and entrepreneurship. So that must be a good thing. And the Western universities, they're all starting departments of entrepreneurship. So we'll have some departments of entrepreneurship too. Well, let's think about it. Juggling is a skill. Let's say we're going to develop juggling as something in Chinese education. So we'll have courses in juggling in universities. We can look at the history of juggling. We can look at the origins of juggling. What was the first recorded history of juggling? How long's juggling been going? What did people say about it many years ago? What do we know about the context in which juggling came forward? Who were these people that juggled many years ago? Why did they do it? How does that relate to society? We can go into juggling in a great way in its history. Show you something else. When you juggle, you throw that up and it goes, you see the curve see the path in the air? It's a parabola. It's a parabola. This side's the same as that side. Physics! So physics is important to juggling, isn't it? So we better have some physics in our juggling curriculum. Let's teach heaps of physics because they need to know about the higher you throw it, the longer it takes. Right? Physics. So we're going to have history, we're going to have physics, We're interested in the people who have been successful jugglers and how they did it, what their abilities were, what their abilities were. So we better have the psychology of juggling. We want our jugglers to be motivated, so let's put psychology into this course. So we have history, we have psychology, we have physics. We've got a whole range of things. And the students go through the course and they come out at the end. Can they juggle? Not at all. They can't juggle one bit. They know heaps about juggling, but they can't actually do this business, can they? There is only one way to learn to juggle. Get a couple of things and have a go. Wave your arms around. You won't be too good when you start, but if you keep going, you will get better, and you practice it, and you practice it, and you practice it. That's how you learn to juggle. So the university course in juggling is not going to produce a big heap of jugglers for China. Likewise, the university course in entrepreneurship is not going to produce a big heap of entrepreneurs for China, because it's something that you do. Now, it's a funny something that you do if it's something like management or entrepreneurship, because it's not entirely physical. You see, I've lost my pen. Hang on. I should have used those bottles of water then. You could have been hit. When I do that, do I do physics as I do it? Do I calculate it's going up at such and such a speed and it'll come down over here and whoosh? I do not do that. The mind does not get that much involved, really. I just kind of, right? I just do it. I don't sort of think it all out, do I? But if you're talking about a skill like management, you just do it, but there's a big thinking part to it, that your mind's got to be involved there. So the skills of management, for example, those skills relate to the mind, to thinking. They're thinking skills, and the word for that is cognitive skills or thinking skills. Now, because the skills are cognitive skills, we're inclined to think that the way to do it is to send everybody to university and they will come out with all the knowledge and the understanding and the skills, but they won't. It's really like juggling. You'll be teaching them a heap of stuff, but they still won't be able to manage. That's why if you're talking about business courses and management courses that I teach, you really need apprenticeship schemes and mentoring schemes, not classroom teaching. So I just make that point to you when we're talking about the curriculum, how you actually choose what you're putting in the curriculum. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done about this notion of skills. And there are some really good books about whether skills can be taught, cognitive skills can be taught at all. There's also a lot of confusion about the distinction between theory and practice. All our students think the real world is one thing, that's where the practice is, and the theory is another thing. Well, if you examine that, and I'm not going to do it now because we've got time, but if you examine that carefully, that view doesn't make sense, really. It doesn't make sense. There is no significant distinction between theory and practice, and you need to work on those notions until you can sort of understand that that's really the case. So we have a lot of problems with theory and practice. If you look at an MBA course, and I don't really pick on the one in this building because MBA courses around the world are like this. MBA courses are practical oriented. We love case studies, etc., etc. We're out there with it. Well, you examine what they actually do, examine what they're really teaching, get down to their curriculum, the real curriculum. There's a whole heap of questions that you want to ask about that. Okay. So, if you have a curriculum and you produce a curriculum, your justification of it, you're going to have a philosophical justification, which is about the nature of knowledge, a sociological justification for your curriculum, about the relationship to society, and a psychological justification, which relates to students' needs and also to what you think about learning theory, which relates to pedagogy. And one last thing on this. Who decides the curriculum? Well, in the West, very much the curriculum is decided from the top down. So that in the universities, the universities make decisions about what they are going to teach in the sense of what qualifications the university is going to provide. Having decided that, they then kind of work their way down. Now, let me show you that as a slide. The intended learning outcomes of the institution, right? What the university is on about. It might be a university of business or something, or technology, or fine arts. Then the intended learning outcomes of the academic program. That means the degree or diploma. Right? So that thing there, the university determines that. That's the degree or diploma. Then you've got to determine what's going to be in it, the outcomes for the various courses that you and I are going to teach. And then that's going to determine what you're going to have in each little unit of work that you put in your course. And then that's going to determine what you're going to have in the lesson of the day. So the whole thing is supposed to work that way. So it's designed that way, but it's delivered that way. In other words, the student learns that which is supposed to contribute to that, which is supposed to contribute to that, which is supposed to contribute to that, which is supposed to contribute to that. If you believe that happens, you'll believe anything. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's not going to work like that. It's not going to work like that at all. The reality is that the real power is always with the teacher. Always with the teacher. When you're in your classroom and you shut the door, there's you and your 30 students, and that's it. Right? That's it. And all sorts of places around the world have put in all sorts of systems to try and control what teachers do. And they've all failed, totally and utterly. Why do they fail? They fail because, first of all, you're educated persons. You've spent 5 at least, probably 10 years at university studying this stuff. You know heaps about it. You're an expert. You know all these things. You've got your views. Your views are based on good reasons. You know what you're going to do. You figure it out. And somebody coming in from the outside and saying, well, actually, I haven't studied it, but I'm telling you, you do this, and we'll send an inspector to check on you. It's not going to work. And where that happens, where the university really pushes down and heavies the teachers, 2 things happen. One is the teachers, who are these qualified people, professional people, they all get brushed off and upset, demotivated. They're not interested in working under those sorts of circumstances, and the second thing they do is they leave. Well, the universities actually like that, because then they can hire other people who'll do what they're told, who are cheaper. But in terms of the university and the country, downhill they go. And if you want a summary of what's happening in many Western universities and in many places, that's exactly what's happening now. That they've tumbled down, so that you've got this whole thing pushing through very enthusiastically, inevitably not working. Inevitably not working. So there we go. That's a little bit about where the curriculum comes from. There's a lot of questions to ask about that. I mentioned to you the whole business of teaching skills. This slide's actually about teaching skills. In vocational education, like business education, like teacher education, this university is a vocational university, right? It's designed for people to get into jobs and do work. This is a vocational university. In vocational education, it's like teaching people badminton, the game of badminton. Badminton's a skill. Now, I used the example of juggling, didn't I? All right, well, there's another example. It's like badminton. If you want to teach people badminton, you've got to give them rackets and put them on courts. And I think that might be the Chinese badminton team, I'm not sure, but I think it might be. Yeah. It is, isn't it? Yeah. You put them on courts and off they go. They're not intellectualizing, are they? They're not intellectualizing, they just react, they just do. Very good example of vocational education. So, if I was concerned about something, I would be really concerned about the extent to which China follows Western education. I think China's got to make its own path and do education in its own way. because a lot of what happens in Western universities isn't that good. And it's not just my opinion. You will find that by and large, most academics agree with me. There's kind of two kinds of academics. There's the real ones, the ones that are interested in things that are intellectual and work on them all the time and can't do otherwise. You can't stop an academic writing and reading and having ideas and saying stuff. All right? There are those ones, and they're pretty much all of the agreement that this is in fact the situation. Now, okay, I don't want to get out of order too much. I taught a course, which I inherited here, on operations and production management, and it was a really good example. I taught this last semester, and I thought, goodness, here I am, I've been asked to teach this thing. I don't really know much about it, but if they want me to teach it, I'll be happy to oblige, why not? We must be in a city that knows more about operations and production management than practically any city in the world. I mean, this city is just absolutely an enormous hive of activity and the production and the movements of goods and services like you wouldn't believe. It's amazing. So we've got that. Then over here we've got this little course that we're going to teach. So I was given the textbook for the course. I had the textbook, and I looked at the textbook, and I noticed a name in it, and I thought, oh, that company's gone now. It was an American textbook. It was on about its 11th edition, and it was the Chinese edition of the American textbook. The Chinese one's about half the size. And I looked at it, I thought, that company's gone. I thought, oh, I'll have a look at another one. So I started looking up the companies, and it suddenly occurred to me that the companies in the book, a good number of them had crashed. They'd gone broke and they'd fallen over. And that was okay. I thought, well, this isn't going to be very good. And then I looked at some of the people, because it was quoting chief executives and, and I thought, actually, that guy was an Enron. He's in jail now. he was arrested and charged rightly for fraud, and here he is still in this old book. So then I started looking them up, and I was looking on the internet to find out how many people in the book were in jail. And the students got really upset, and Petrel's going to be horrified when I do this to her book. But I took the book, you see, and all the students had to buy the book, and I got the rubbish tin there, and I went, we're not using the book. And they go, oh. So how can we get rid of books? Well, some books need to be gotten rid of. I make the point there that some things aren't university subjects, right? And there's plenty of examples. So you've got to be careful. Apprenticeship schemes are really good and mentoring schemes are good, but they're expensive and they're difficult to run, and but they do actually work. They're better ways to teach people a whole lot of stuff. Okay, so what do you believe about teaching and learning? We're now getting on to pedagogy, how you teach. The teacher has to decide the pedagogy. I said once you close your classroom door, nobody knows really what's going on. That's you deciding how you're going to teach. All right? There are different ways, different modes of delivery. Try and teach individual people. Don't teach classes. We teach classes, we teach in mass, we lecture to large groups, but the reality is that they're individuals. Everyone, totally different. What you're thinking is not what you're thinking, not what you're thinking. You're all different. You're all different, but we tend to think, right? So the big challenge is when you've got big groups, to find ways that you can individualize them and recognize them as individuals and respond to their situation. I'm not going to talk about that because we don't have time. I put a cross on it because I don't like it. But let's talk about that. That's Benjamin Bloom, who's an American educator, and that's him in his old age. And about 40 years ago now, he wrote a thing which is called Bloom's taxonomy. It's like a typology, like a little chart that shows the different kinds of thinking skills. So it's of cognitive skills or thinking skills. And this chart, remembering, understanding, applying, analysing, evaluating, creating. All right? So if you set a test for your students, it can be one that they can do on the basis of remembering, or it can be one that they can do on the basis of understanding. You can be testing for understanding, or you can be testing their ability to apply information. This is very common with case studies in business. All right? Case studies in business, I bet not harp on too much about business because you're not all business teachers, but case studies in business are quite a good example. Heaps of people, heaps of teachers use case studies, and students think case studies are to find out about the business that's featured in the case study. Not at all. Not at all. We're not interested in that business. It might even be out of business in 3 years' time. The purpose of a case study is to give the student something to use to apply the theory of management, to apply the theory. So when you use a case study, that's about getting people to apply. So there's no point in having a case study where you ask questions like, what did the manager do on Tuesday or something? That's a comprehension test. Right? That's a comprehension test. These long case studies, 5 or 6 pages that we expect students to read. And if I'm reading them, I mean, it's awful. So applying information, and what do you apply? You apply the theory. You don't apply the case study. You apply the theory to the case study. So there we go. Likewise with analysis and so forth. And if you're asking questions in an exam that requires the students to invent totally new and different things, then you're using the one up there, creativity. Now, in a proper curriculum, you're going to cover all of that. You're going to cover all of that. Now, that arrow there suggests that you start here and go up. That arrow I don't agree with at all. That's not how things are done. Little wee children can be very creative. Right? They're not highly academic in the sense of university education, but they can be very creative. So that any person at any level in their life's development is actually going to be doing all of these things. All of these things. And it's important in your curriculum for each of your courses that you cover all of these things. And don't just focus on the easy stuff, which is these ones. Right? I.e., don't focus on what the textbook says, including examples, mathematical examples. We can thank Benjamin Bloom for that. There's another view of the same thing. This says you do the comprehension and knowledge business, as they call it in this one, at high school, and that's the undergraduate level, and that's the graduate level. What a disaster! And I've met that here, where you have students that come into the university in the first couple of years, they do learning about things, and then when they get to their last year of their degree, or the first year of postgraduate, you say to them, now you're going to write a thesis. Now you're going to actually do a report on something. And it's an absolute disaster, because they need to start doing all this other stuff right way back. And one of the things I discovered dramatically when I got here was that I assumed, wrongly, that my students would be able to write an essay, would be able to write a report. In other words, they could show their creativity, right, through those means. Well, they couldn't write an essay. They didn't know how to go about writing an essay. So what I've had to do is to teach them how to do that, as well as to teach them about the content of the course. Right, so I put a cross by those because I don't like them. I put red crosses on things I don't like. Now, I mentioned creativity, and some of you will know who he is. Do you know who he is? It's John Cleese. Now, I've put on the website, I keep a website, and we'll come to that in a minute. For you, I've put a video there, all right, which I nicked off YouTube when I was in New Zealand. So there's a video there, and it describes what you need if you are going to be creative. Right? And it's no great mystery. If you're going to be creative and invent new stuff, which incidentally is exactly what the Communist Party of China has been saying for the last 3 months, right? They want quality. The emphasis is on quality and innovation, right? They want people who can develop new ideas, worthwhile things, i.e. to be creative. Question is, I agree with them. That's a really good idea. Question is, how do you do it? Well, space to be undisturbed. If you're going to be creative, you need not to be pressured and put upon. You need a bit of space to move. You need the time to play with things, and Cleese makes the point that creativity is like play. You've got to have the space and the time, like a little child, to try things out. Time, the third factor, you notice he's a character. This third one's also time, persisting in uncertainty, right? That if in fact you think that things aren't working out, you don't just give up, you sort of keep working on it over a longer period. Confidence is really important. There's nothing more important than giving our students confidence. So that's why really anything they say, you say yes. Good on you, well done, you're looking for that. And if you find yourself saying no or that's wrong, just forget it. Because the most important thing is to build their confidence, right? You say, well, you had a go, and keep going, keep going. With senior students, the most important thing you can say to them is keep going. Keep going. You know, I've written this. You think, oh my God, what a mess. But keep going. Keep going. Right. So confidence. And lastly, humour, because Cleese makes the point that in actual fact, humour is the closest there is to sort of this oddity that goes with the creativity. So I recommend the video to you, and I've made it available to you. Now, I mentioned before that pyramid thing of Benjamin Bloom, and how I didn't agree with the arrow that said that you start at the bottom and work steadily up. Alfred North Whitehead, who was an English educator, he was a mathematician first. He did important work in the 1930s on mathematics. And then he wrote about all sorts of things, including education. He has an excellent paper in the 1930s called The Rhythmic Claims of Freedom and Discipline. And what he's on about is this. And he was thinking of teaching people mathematics, actually. What you're trying to do in your classroom is that you're trying to, first of all, get your students interested in something, right? He calls it romance. The freedom, the interest in the something, the first, ooh, yeah, as silly as romance. So to get an interest in the something, that's the first thing, you've got to do that. And that's a motivational task. Secondly, you then have to do the precision and the discipline. They have got to learn stuff, right? The sort of thing that is the history of academic disciplines. You can't do economics unless you actually know the history of economics. You can't do biology unless you actually know about the blood system and physiology, etc., etc. You've got to know stuff, heaps of stuff. But when you know these things, when you've done your study, the next stage is to do something with it. And this is a freedom stage, a creativity stage. So, freedom, then the hard work of learning and coming to understand things, and then more freedom as you actually work and develop new ideas yourself. The rhythmic claims of freedom and discipline. So that's what Alfred North Whitehead is on about. And that I found that a very helpful paper for donkey's years now. I've sort of thought of that, because you've got to try and get that sort of into your classrooms. You've got to try and make your students feel that they're inspired and they're free and they want to try stuff out. But at the same time, you've got to teach them the discipline. You've got to teach them what humankind knows about things, and that's really important. So there we go. I won't go into all of it, but that's enough. Okay, evaluation. How we assess. If you take one thing from this presentation, take the one at the bottom right. Evaluation. Examinations are evil. Evil, absolutely evil. I'll tell you a little story, but don't tell it outside this room. It's terrible when they're videoing it. But when I got to the School of Management on the South Campus, I live on the South Campus, and it's very nice. And the School of Management is excellent. They're a wonderful bunch, and they're really keen, they keep asking me all sorts of questions, and I enjoy it very much, and I'm hoping that I can come back for another year. I'm in the process of trying to organise that now. And I came there and I said, well, okay, what do you want me to teach? And we had a bit of discussion about that, so that's fine. I said, oh yeah, okay, well, I'll set out what I think I'm going to do and so forth. And then it transpired that you had to have an examination. And I said, that's interesting. Oh yes, every course in the School of Management has an examination, I was told. Yeah, so, well, that's good news. I thought, well, my one's not. And they were very nice. They didn't like to sort of complain or make a fuss, so my one doesn't. Right, my one doesn't. And I'll tell you how I assess instead, which is far worse for the students if you want hard work. But examinations are evil, and look, you can see why they're evil. Just look at these guys all regimented. There's freedom for you. These are guys inspired by the discipline keyed as, aren't they? Whew. They all look the same, they're doing the same stuff, they're all learning the same stuff. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. The real terrible thing about examinations, why are they so terrible? Remember we were just talking about Bloom's taxonomy? Remember? The examinations, if you read the questions that you see in examinations, they're right at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. Who said this? Who said that? What this? What's this? What's that? In other words, the stuff that's in the textbook. If you have examinations, you're dragging the students down. You're dragging them down to that level. You can do examinations that require creativity. It is possible. But we're not going to do it because it's real hard work, and these poor students in an exam situation can't be bright and beautiful and creative, can they? It's just not going to happen. Examinations are undermining the very thing that the Communist Party of China is asking us to develop. That's what it's doing. What's more, I've been talking to quite a few students, and their abilities are absolutely fantastic. I mean, as you know better than I, these are people who can memorise textbooks. I couldn't memorise a textbook. Their ability to remember stuff is enormous. And I thought, wow, here they are, they do the study, they do the examination. It's an enormous amount of brain power, an enormous amount of energy goes into that. And of course you ask them the question, what do you remember about 6 months on or a year on? And the answer of course is nothing. So all this brain power and energy that's in China, that's a part of Chinese things, is actually being wasted by the examination system. It's actually being wasted. Yeah. You've got this precious and important resource, and you're wasting it doing these things. If we can just get them to do real stuff, these students are going to go like you wouldn't believe. They're really dedicated and determined students. They're lovely students. Get them doing the real stuff, and it's going to be amazing. Right. Evaluation drives student learning, so that's important. I'm not going to talk about weighting course objectives because it'll take too long. And you must assess at all of Bloom's levels, that's important too. Right, Western education system. I've indicated already that there have been some developments starting about 20 years ago. And this is to do with the world economy as much as anything else. Education was once about the human individual becoming a wise, understanding, thoughtful person who knew about things and was a better person for it. And then, of course, education became just like schooling, just like primary and secondary schooling. Tertiary education became a part of the industrial machine in countries, and particularly in Western countries. Right? So that you're driving the country through by using your education system. You've always got this tension in education. On the one hand, the taxpayers of the country and the government are paying for it, but on the other hand, private individuals are benefiting from it. So there's always a balance between the interests of the private individual and the interests of the country. And you've got to get that balance right. And in the West, they got it dramatically wrong. And the result is that there's just a lot of wasted effort. So So that's the sort of thing that China's got to think really seriously about, in my opinion. Yeah, we've got to keep going, or we will know. Okay, so it's sometimes called neoliberalism, this notion that economics is important and that it drives the education system. The university is a business, right? And so it's run top down as a business. The students became customers instead of students. Students became customers. And of course the thing about customers is customers are always right. You must try to satisfy customers. Well, in that notion that you as a lecturer are trying to satisfy your student customer is the notion that you really don't know and that they might know. And that's not right either. Universities give people credentials, but they don't necessarily give them wisdom anymore. They give them credentials, and credentials is what our students want, like you wouldn't believe. And that's because we're taking them that way. And of course, in a Confucian society like China, that is not necessarily the way to go, or the way that the Chinese people will want to go. There's a lot of important stuff in there. I've talked about absurd specializations or specialities. What happens when you go through that? Well, you get poor teaching practices. We all teach far too many students. We have to assess far too many students. We overly assess them. They're all assessed to death, and the whole thing makes no difference at all. It's just a sort of shuffling system. So you get poor teacher practices, and it was discovered in the West that distance education is actually cheaper than running buildings, you know, where you've got to have cafeterias and toilets and all the other stuff. And distance education is cheaper. So universities, in a bid to make money, turned themselves into distance education providers. And that's having a whole lot of effects too. The other side of this, pushing back against this, I would say that real scholars, those that are involved in scholarship, they relate to other scholars. They can tell the difference between a real paper that's about some academic thing and something that's going into a journal just to kind of keep somebody's job going, etc., etc. And there are thousands of journals churning out all this rubbish, but there's a small number that are really important. And you know, there's an enormous difference between the real stuff and all the stuff that's going on. Professional organisations are really vital because not run by the universities, but run by groups of scholars together. I belong to the Philosophy of Education Society of Australasia. Right? We're starting a branch right here in Guangdong. Starting a branch here. I went to their conference in Taiwan. Foolishly, I volunteered to start the first Chinese branch. Now, that society is really good because they operate as a group of scholars, and if I talk nonsense to them, they go thump, right? Okay, and that's fine, and they're very nice about it. But that's not how it is in a whole lot of other places where they're not interested in scholarship. They're more involved in running universities and pursuing their careers and all that sort of stuff. So there is a unity in the teacher profession, I think, that kind of stands against the institutions. And a part of the things that have been happening, as to show from that, is the development of open journals. See, there was this notion, if you go to Singapore, Singapore's an incredible place. I applied for a job in Singapore. And they said, oh yes, that's very interesting. Yeah, we need to have a list of your publications. And I said, they're in the CV. And they said, oh, no, we have got this list of journals, right? We've got this list of journals, and these are the journals that you must publish in, and those are the ones that we're interested in people who publish in. And I looked at them, and I didn't say what I thought. I better not say it here either, because we're being recorded. But they're rubbish. The journals are absolute nonsense. They're a social science type of journal that kind of is using a very narrow methodology, you know, to study something, and it doesn't work, and everybody knows it doesn't work, but little teams of people produce these papers, and they said, oh no, these are the most important journals, and we want our staff to be... Well, it works, because if you're interested in the rankings of universities, part of that ranking relates to the ranking of journals. So the same group of clowns, they rank the journals, then they rank the universities, and they're producing this great industry over here about ranking and rating things. It's got nothing to do with real scholarship, nothing at all. It's a whole businessy game that's going on. They're all full of their own self-importance. Actually, it's got nothing to do with scholarship. People who are interested in scholarship and learning, they tend to be a bit antisocial quite often. And you know, they write papers that aren't going to be attractive necessarily to these journals because they're a bit odd. They're a bit odd, you know. Okay, and that's the society that I relate to, the Philosophy of Education Society of Australasia. What does it do? It organises conferences and publishes your papers, and people support each other. That's the most important thing, and there's conferences in Taiwan. Last December, and I'm grateful to this university for paying to send me there, which was really good. And I presented a couple of papers there, one of which I'd done with a colleague here in the School of Management, so we were pleased to get our paper in so quickly. Okay, so how do I teach? Do you guys need a break, or should I just keep going?
Keep going.
Keep going? All right. I got a heap of things to talk about, and I'll just say a few words about all of those, all right? So course objectives, the course website, email, lectures, tutorials, use of external resources, library facilities, online marking, and student dishonesty. Right, course objectives. It's really important that you're clear with what your course objectives are. And we've talked about Bloom, and you've got to have your course objectives really understood by you, and you have got to keep hammering on at them with your students. Always keep coming back to your course objectives all the way through. And relate your course objectives directly to your assessment. This objective's assessed like that, this one like that, okay? I think that's really important because the students have got to know what they're doing, what it's about, and they have that rationale. Okay, that's a slide that I used with a class the other day, all right? Your professor has two roles to help you. That's the first one, to learn important things about management globally, okay? But the other role, to be your examiner. Two roles. You're doing two jobs in a classroom, and they're not the same in any way, shape or form. They're really different. Helping students is one thing, examining them is another. So when you examine them, you must be clear on the standards that are important, the standards that you're working to, and you have to be prepared to hit those standards and say, look, sorry sunshine, you failed. All right, you have to do that. And it's by failing students, of course, that you drag the whole lot up by having the standards. And too many lecturers, and I'm not talking about China here, I can talk about New Zealand and Australia. Too many lecturers have discovered that it's really easy. Just pass everybody, and nobody ever complains about anything. I remember when I was teaching in Australia, and there was this guy who did an essay for me, and I failed him, right? I failed him, that was fine. So he had another go, and I failed him again. And the next thing I know, some of my colleagues come to me and say, you failed so-and-so, yeah, you didn't do it. And the next thing I know, the head of school has me into his office and says, now he can't, you know, he's got good grades here, and he's a great student, and he's a real good guy, and you know, you can't fail. I said, I'm failing him. He hasn't done what he had to do for me. That's the answer. I don't know what he's like. Yeah, okay. And then there was the whole legal bit. He's going to complain to the ombudsman. It's like a sport. I don't know you have ombudsmen here, but an ombudsman's like a sort of a kind of a judge set up by Parliament to look after things. Oh, well, you have the same sort of system within the Communist Party, actually. You have groups like that. So he was going to apply and complain, and he did. That was okay, and I just came the Christmas party, right? Christmas, the end of the year, the party. And the guy was there. And I said, hello, how are you, etc., and talked to him a bit. And he didn't seem to be too upset with me. And then I said to him, what have you been doing? And he said, oh, I've just about recovered from the accident. I said, what accident? Oh, he said, I was in a motorcycle accident and I hit my head. You were? Well, the reason he couldn't do an essay for me was that he'd been hit in the head in a motorcycle accident. But here we had the whole university heavying me, legal action and the whole bit proved that he failed because he was a good student, and I'm sure he was once. But he wasn't at the point that he gave me the stuff. So as a teacher, you can come under a lot of pressure both direct and indirect, to try and pass people. And you've got to know what those academic standards are, because you're keeping something that's really precious. I mean, you're keeping scholarship. You are the keepers of scholarship. You have to know that, and you have to understand it. You have to understand it to the point that you've got the strength of will that you need to say, that's where I stand, that's where it is. Tough business. Okay, another slide I give to the students, and gave to those students. You have to learn two things. I try to tell them a bit about what we're trying to do in the classroom. You've got to learn about management globally, right, concepts, etc. But you've got to learn how to inquire into management, i.e. the skills. You've got to learn to ask questions, to obtain information, to draw conclusions, right, to communicate ideas. And that's the bit that needs a lot of work. So that their abilities, said to the students, you know about something when you remember it, you understand something when you can make use of it, right? And I'm going to be asking you the two types of questions in your test. You demonstrate research and communication skills, you demonstrate these. Now, I have them send me an email each week, all right? I'm going to talk more about that. They demonstrate stuff in their weekly email. They do a glossary. Because this is their second language learners, I have them do a glossary, like their own word list. And I have them put in a word and then give two examples that they've gotten from books of its use with APA formatting there, and then two examples of use that they make up. So 4 sentences on the one word. And last semester that worked out really well. They actually quite appreciated doing that. Okay, a glossary and their research paper, which they have to do. Okay, and the course assessment, well, we didn't have an exam. That was the good news for them. But they do have a test. And the reason that I have it in week 6 is to get them going. I mean, you and I are all in competition. We all teach the same students. And if they're going to work on your course, they're not going to work on mine. That's the reality of it. And I like to make, sorry about that. I like to make sure that they actually, they actually focus on the course pretty early, and that's why I like to have a relatively early test, just to get their minds on the job. Okay, and then another test the same way. Their research project, which is their main thing, 40%. The only reason it's in week 14 and not at the end is that I want to give myself a couple of weeks to mark it. That's all that is. And then their glossary right at the end, because you need something at the end. And then a little mark on their communication to me by email. Right, the course website is really important. I have a course website for them. Now you'll be able to use Blackboard because your university has got Blackboard, you're setting up Blackboard and people are doing that. I knew that you had Blackboard, but I didn't use it for the reason is I suspect it's in Chinese. And it would have taken me a heap of effort to try and do it in Chinese. So I said, right, I'll just do my own one, right? Do my own website. And the gains come the second time round, because once you put materials onto Blackboard, you got them there next time you teach the course. It builds up and builds up and builds up. So it gets easier and easier in a lot of ways, and you make it better and better each year. Okay, there's the website for the student. That's for that course, Management a Global Perspective. All right, and a little introductory thing. It looks like that. And then they get their arrangements, that's on their website, and then their course objectives, that's on their website. And their assessment is on their website, and the details of the assessment so they know what they're doing. All the stuff that you would put in your normal course handout at the start. And then just a couple of things about some sessions. One of the sessions, session 3 for these students, was interesting because I'm teaching them research skills, and one of the research skills they need is to be able to do a bibliography. They're going to need to get information from the library, from the databases that the library provides, and they're going to need to put it into a bibliography and use it in their papers. Now, the library was kind enough to produce a gentleman who came over and taught the students this. And they were really pleased because he spoke Chinese. So he spoke Chinese, they learnt this stuff. It was far, far better than me teaching it to them in English. And he could come there, and what's more, they even have a telephone number. So I say to the students, if you've got problems, Bring the library, they speak Chinese. And they're pleased with that. And there's two things. There's learning to use the academic databases, and they need to do this. And in my opinion, they need to learn this the day they enter the university. There's no point waiting till they get to be near graduates. It's far too late. They have to have these skills right from square one. So, and every course has got to have some of this stuff in it, right? So you squash down the amount